Chapter number 43 of The Law and the Lady. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Wiebke Müller. The Law and the Lady by Wilkie Collins. Chapter 43. At last. My letter from Mr. Playmore, enclosing the agent's extraordinary telegram, was not inspired by the sanguine view of our prospects which he had expressed to me when we met at Benjamin's house. "If the telegram means anything," he wrote, "it means that the fragments of the torn letter have been cast into the housemaid's bucket, along with the dust, the ashes, and the rest of the litter in the room, and have been emptied on the dust heap at Gleninch. Since this was done, the accumulated refuse collected from the periodical cleansings of the house, during a term of nearly 3 years, including, of course, the ashes from the fires kept burning, for the greater part of the year, in the library and the picture gallery, have been poured upon the heap, and have buried the precious morsels of paper deeper and deeper, day by day. Even if we have a fair chance of finding these fragments, what hope can we feel, at this distance of time, of recovering them with the writing in a state of preservation? I shall be glad to hear, by return of post if possible, how the matter strikes you. If you could make it convenient to consult with me personally in Edinburgh, we should save time, when time may be of serious importance to us. While you are at Dr. Starkweather's, you are within easy reach of the place. Please think of it." I thought of it seriously enough. The foremost question which I had to consider was the question of my husband. The departure of the mother and son from Spain had been so long delayed by the surgeon's orders, that the travellers had only advanced on their homeward journey as far as Bordeaux, when I had last heard from Mrs. Macallan 3 or 4 days since. Allowing for an interval of repose at Bordeaux, and for the slow rate at which they would be compelled to move afterward, I might still expect them to arrive in England some time before a letter from the agent in America could reach Mr. Playmore. How, in this position of affairs, I could contrive to join the lawyer in Edinburgh, after meeting my husband in London, it was not easy to see. The wise and the right way, as I thought, was to tell Mr. Playmore frankly that I was not mistress of my own movements, and that he had better address his next letter to me at Benjamin's house. Writing to my legal adviser in this sense, I had a word of my own to add on the subject of the torn letter. In the last years of my father's life I had travelled with him in Italy, and I had seen in the museum at Naples the wonderful relics of a bygone time discovered among the ruins of Pompeii. By way of encouraging Mr. Playmore, I now reminded him that the eruption which had overwhelmed the town had preserved, for more than 1600 years, such perishable things as the straw in which pottery had been packed, the paintings on house walls, the dresses worn by the inhabitants, and, most noticeable of all in our case, a piece of ancient paper still attached to the volcanic ashes which had fallen over it. If these discoveries had been made after a lapse of 16 centuries, under a layer of dust and ashes on a large scale, surely we might hope to meet with similar cases of preservation, after a lapse of 3 or 4 years only, under a layer of dust and ashes on a small scale. Taking for granted, what was perhaps doubtful enough, that the fragments of the letter could be recovered, my own conviction was that the writing on them, though it might be faded, would certainly still be legible. The very accumulations which Mr. Playmore deplored would be the means of preserving them from the rain and the damp. With these modest hints I closed my letter, and thus for once, thanks to my Continental experience, I was able to instruct my lawyer. Another day passed, and I heard nothing of the travellers. I began to feel anxious. I made my preparations for my journey southward overnight, and I resolved to start for London the next day, unless I heard of some change in Mrs. Macallan's travelling arrangements in the interval. The post of the next morning decided my course of action. It brought me a letter from my mother-in-law, which added one more to the memorable dates in my domestic calendar. Eustace and his mother had advanced as far as Paris on their homeward journey, when a cruel disaster had befallen them. The fatigues of travelling, and the excitement of his anticipated meeting with me, had proved together to be too much for my husband. He had held out as far as Paris with the greatest difficulty, and he was now confined to his bed again, struck down by a relapse. The doctors, this time, had no fear for his life, provided that his patience would support him through a lengthened period of the most absolute repose. "It now rests with you, Valeria," Mrs. Macallan wrote, "to fortify and comfort Eustace under this new calamity. Do not suppose that he has ever blamed or thought of blaming you for leaving him with me in Spain, as soon as he was declared to be out of danger. "It was I who left her," he said to me, when we first talked about it; "and it is my wife's right to expect that I should go back to her." Those were his words, my dear, and he has done all he can to abide by them. Helpless in his bed, he now asks you to take the will for the deed, and to join him in Paris. I think I know you well enough, my child, to be sure that you will do this; and I need only add one word of caution before I close my letter. Avoid all reference, not only to the trial you will do that of your own accord but even to our house at Gleninch. You will understand how he feels, in his present state of nervous depression, when I tell you that I should never have ventured on asking you to join him here, if your letter had not informed me that your visits to Dexter were at an end. Would you believe it? His horror of anything which recalls our past troubles is still so vivid, that he has actually asked me to give my consent to selling Gleninch. So Eustace's mother wrote of him; but she had not trusted entirely to her own powers of persuasion. A slip of paper was enclosed in her letter, containing these 2 lines, traced in pencil, oh, so feebly and so wearily, by my poor darling himself: "I am too weak to travel any further, Valeria. Will you come to me and forgive me?" A few pencil marks followed, but they were illegible. The writing of those 2 short sentences had exhausted him. It's not saying much for myself, I know; but having confessed it when I was wrong, let me at least record it when I did what was right. I decided instantly on giving up all further connection with the recovery of the torn letter. If Eustace asked me the question, I was resolved to be able to answer truly: "I have made the sacrifice that assures your tranquillity. When resignation was hardest, I have humbled my obstinate spirit, and I have given way for my husband's sake." There was half an hour to spare before I left the vicarage for the railway station. In that interval I wrote again to Mr. Playmore, telling him plainly what my position was, and withdrawing, at once and forever, from all share in investigating the mystery which lay hidden under the dust heap at Gleninch. Chapter 44. Of the Law and the Lady. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Wiebke Müller. The Law and the Lady by Wilkie Collins. Chapter 44. Our New Honeymoon. It is not to be disguised or denied that my spirits were depressed on my journey to London. To resign the one cherished purpose of my life, when I had suffered so much in pursuing it, and when I had to all appearance so nearly reached the realization of my hopes, was putting to a hard trial a woman's fortitude and a woman's sense of duty. Still, even if the opportunity had been offered to me, I would not have recalled my letter to Mr. Playmore. "It is done, and well done," I said to myself; "and I have only to wait a day to be reconciled to it, when I give my husband my first kiss." I had planned and hoped to reach London in time to start for Paris by the night mail; but the train was twice delayed on the long journey from the north, and there was no help for it but to sleep at Benjamin's villa, and to defer my departure until the morning. It was of course impossible for me to warn my old friend of the change in my plans. My arrival took him by surprise. I found him alone in his library, with a wonderful illumination of lamps and candles, absorbed over some morsels of torn paper scattered on the table before him. "What in the world are you about?" I asked. Benjamin blushed. I was going to say like a young girl, but young girls have given up blushing in these latter days of the age we live in. "Oh, nothing, nothing," he said confusedly. "Don't notice it." He stretched out his hand to brush the morsels of paper off the table. Those morsels raised a sudden suspicion in my mind. I stopped him. "You have heard from Mr. Playmore," I said. "Tell me the truth, Benjamin. Yes or no?" Benjamin blushed a shade deeper, and answered, "Yes." "Where is the letter?" "I mustn't show it to you, Valeria." This, need I say, made me determined to see the letter. My best way of persuading Benjamin to show it to me was to tell him of the sacrifice that I had made to my husband's wishes. "I have no further voice in the matter," I added, when I had done. "It now rests entirely with Mr. Playmore to go on to give up, and this is my last opportunity of discovering what he really thinks about it. Don't I deserve some little indulgence? Have I no claim to look at the letter?" Benjamin was too much surprised and too much pleased with me, when he heard what had happened, to be able to resist my entreaties. He gave me the letter. Mr. Playmore wrote to appeal confidentially to Benjamin, as a commercial man. In the long course of his occupation in business, it was just possible that he might have heard of cases in which documents have been put together again after having been torn up by design or by accident. Even if his experience failed in this particular, he might be able to refer to some authority in London who would be capable of giving an opinion on the subject. By way of explaining his strange request, Mr. Playmore reverted to the notes which Benjamin had taken at Miserrimus Dexter's house, and informed him of the serious importance of the gibberish which he had reported under protest. The letter closed by recommending that any correspondence which ensued should be kept a secret from me, on the ground that it might excite false hopes in my mind if I were informed of it. I now understood the tone which my worthy adviser had adopted in writing to me. His interest in the recovery of the letter was evidently so overpowering that common prudence compelled him to conceal it from me, in case of ultimate failure. This did not look as if Mr. Playmore was likely to give up the investigation on my withdrawal from it. I glanced again at the fragments of paper on Benjamin's table, with an interest in them which I had not felt yet. "Has anything been found at Gleninch?" I asked. "No," said Benjamin. "I have only been trying experiments with a letter of my own, before I wrote to Mr. Playmore." "Oh, you have torn up the letter yourself, then?" "Yes; and to make it all the more difficult to put them together again, I shook up the pieces in a basket. It's a childish thing to do, my dear, at my age." He stopped, looking very much ashamed of himself. "Well," I went on, "and have you succeeded in putting your letter together again?" "It's not very easy, Valeria, but I have made a beginning. It's the same principle as the principle in the puzzles which we used to put together when I was a boy. Only get one central bit of it right, and the rest of the puzzle falls into its place in a longer or a shorter time. Please don't tell anybody, my dear. People might say I was in my dotage. To think of that gibberish in my notebook having a meaning in it, after all! I only got Mr. Playmore's letter this morning, and I'm really almost ashamed to mention it I have been trying experiments of torn letters, off and on, ever since. You won't tell upon me, will you?" I answered the dear old man by a hearty embrace. Now that he had lost his steady moral balance, and had caught the infection of my enthusiasm, I loved him better than ever. But I was not quite happy, though I tried to appear so. Struggle against it as I might, I felt a little mortified when I remembered that I had resigned all further connection with the search for the letter at such a time as this. My one comfort was to think of Eustace. My one encouragement was to keep my mind fixed as constantly as possible on the bright change for the better that now appeared in the domestic prospect. Here, at least, there was no disaster to fear. Here I could honestly feel that I had triumphed. My husband had come back to me of his own free will. He had not given way under the hard weight of evidence. He had yielded to the nobler influences of his gratitude and his love. And I had taken him to my heart again, not because I had made discoveries which left him no other alternative than to live with me, but because I believed in the better mind that had come to him, and loved and trusted him without reserve. Was it not worth some sacrifice to have arrived at this result? True, most true. And yet I was a little out of spirits. Ah, well, well, the remedy was within a day's journey. The sooner I was with Eustace, the better. Early the next morning I left London for Paris by the tidal train. Benjamin accompanied me to the terminus. "I shall write to Edinburgh by to-day's post," he said, in the interval before the train moved out of the station. "I think I can find the man Mr. Playmore wants to help him, if he decides to go on. Have you any message to send, Valeria?" "No, I have done with it, Benjamin. I have nothing more to say." "Shall I write and tell you how it ends, if Mr. Playmore does really try the experiment at Gleninch?" I answered as I felt, a little bitterly. "Yes," I said. "Write and tell me if the experiments fail." My old friend smiled. He knew me better than I knew myself. "All right," he said resignedly. "I have got the address of your banker's correspondent in Paris. You will have to go there for money, my dear, and you may find a letter waiting for you in the office when you least expect it. Let me hear how your husband goes on. Good-bye, and God bless you." That evening I was restored to Eustace. He was too weak, poor fellow, even to raise his head from the pillow. I knelt down at the bedside and kissed him. His languid, weary eyes kindled with a new life as my lips touched his. "I must try to live now," he whispered, "for your sake." My mother in law had delicately left us together. When he said those words, the temptation to tell him of the new hope that had come to brighten our lives was more than I could resist. "You must try to live now, Eustace," I said, "for some one else besides me." His eyes looked wonderingly into mine. "Do you mean my mother?" he asked. I laid my head on his bosom, and whispered back, "I mean your child." I had all my reward for all that I had given up. I forgot Mr. Playmore, I forgot Gleninch. Our new honeymoon dates in my remembrance from that day. The quiet time passed in the by street in which we lived. The outer stir and tumult of Parisian life ran its daily course around us, unnoticed and unheard. Steadily, though slowly, Eustace gained strength. The doctors, with a word or two of caution, left him almost entirely to me. "You are his physician," they said. "The happier you make him, the sooner he will recover." The quiet, monotonous round of my new life was far from wearying me. I, too, wanted repose. I had no interests, no pleasures, out of my husband's room. Once, and only once, the placid surface of our lives was just gently ruffled by an allusion to the past. Something that I accidentally said reminded Eustace of our last interview at Major Fitz David's house. He referred very delicately to what I had then said of the verdict pronounced on him at the trial; and he left me to infer that a word from my lips, confirming what his mother had already told him, would quiet his mind at once and forever. My answer involved no embarrassment or difficulties. I could and did honestly tell him that I had made his wishes my law. But it was hardly in womanhood, I am afraid, to be satisfied with merely replying and to leave it there. I thought it due to me that Eustace too should concede something in the way of an assurance which might quiet my mind. As usual with me, the words followed the impulse to speak them. "Eustace," I asked, "are you quite cured of those cruel doubts which once made you leave me?" His answer, as he afterwards said, made me blush with pleasure. "Ah, Valeria, I should never have gone away if I had known you then as well as I know you now." So the last shadows of distrust melted away out of our lives. The very remembrance of the turmoil and the trouble of my past days in London seemed now to fade from my memory. We were lovers again; we were absorbed again in each other; we would almost fancy that our marriage dated back once more to a day or two since. But one last victory over myself was wanting to make my happiness complete. I still felt secret longings, in those dangerous moments when I was left by myself, to know whether the search for the torn letter had or had not taken place. What wayward creatures we are! With everything that a woman could want to make her happy, I was ready to put that happiness in peril rather than remain ignorant of what was going on at Gleninch. I actually hailed the day when my empty purse gave me an excuse for going to my banker's correspondent on business, and so receiving any letters waiting for me which might be placed in my hands. I applied for my money without knowing what I was about, wondering all the time whether Benjamin had written to me or not. My eyes wandered over the desks and tables in the office, looking for letters furtively. Nothing of the sort was visible. But a man appeared from an inner office, an ugly man, who was yet beautiful to my eyes, for this sufficient reason: he had a letter in his hand, and he said, "Is this for you, ma'am?" A glance at the address showed me Benjamin's handwriting. Had they tried the experiment of recovering the letter? And had they failed? Somebody put my money in my bag, and politely led me out to the little hired carriage which was waiting for me at the door. I remember nothing distinctly until I opened the letter on my way home. The first words told me that the dust heap had been examined, and that the fragments of the torn letter had been found. End of chapter 44. Chapter number 45 of The Law and the Lady. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Wiebke Müller. The Law and the Lady by Wilkie Collins. Chapter 45. The Dust Heap Disturbed. My head turned giddy. I was obliged to wait, and let my overpowering agitation subside before I could read any more. Looking at the letter again, after an interval, my eyes fell accidentally on a sentence near the end, which surprised and startled me. I stopped the driver of the carriage, at the entrance to the street in which our lodgings were situated, and told him to take me to the beautiful park of Paris, the famous Bois de Boulogne. My object was to gain time enough in this way to read the letter carefully through by myself, and to ascertain whether I ought or ought not to keep the receipt of it a secret before I confronted my husband and his mother at home. This precaution taken, I read the narrative which my good Benjamin had so wisely and so thoughtfully written for me. Treating the various incidents methodically, he began with the report which had arrived, in due course of mail, from our agent in America. Our man had successfully traced the lodge keeper's daughter and her husband to a small town in one of the Western States. Mr. Playmore's letter of introduction at once secured him a cordial reception from the married pair, and a patient hearing when he stated the object of his voyage across the Atlantic. His first questions led to no very encouraging results. The woman was confused and surprised, and was apparently quite unable to exert her memory to any useful purpose. Fortunately, her husband proved to be a very intelligent man. He took the agent privately aside, and said to him: "I understand my wife, and you don't. Tell me exactly what it is you want to know, and leave it to me to discover how much she remembers and how much she forgets." This sensible suggestion was readily accepted. The agent waited for events a day and a night. Early the next morning the husband said to him: "Talk to my wife now, and you'll find she has something to tell you. Only mind this, don't laugh at her when she speaks of trifles. She is ashamed to speak of trifles, even to me. Thinks men are above such matters, you know. Listen quietly, and let her talk, and you will get at it all in that way." The agent followed his instructions, and "got at it" as follows. The woman remembered perfectly well being sent to clean the bedrooms and put them tidy, after the gentlefolks had all left Gleninch. Her mother had a bad hip at the time, and could not go with her and help her. She did not much fancy being alone in the great house after what had happened in it. On her way to her work she passed two of the cottagers' children in the neighbourhood at play in the park. Mr. Macallan was always kind to his poor tenants, and never objected to the young ones round about having a run on the grass. The two children idly followed her to the house. She took them inside along with her, not liking the place as already mentioned, and feeling that they would be company in the solitary rooms. She began her work in the guests' corridor, leaving the room in the other corridor in which the death had happened to the last. There was very little to do in the two first rooms. There was not litter enough, when she had swept the floors and cleaned the grates, to even half fill the housemaid's bucket which she carried with her. The children followed her about, and, all things considered, were very good company in the lonely place. The third room, that is to say, the bedchamber which had been occupied by Miserrimus Dexter, was in a much worse state than the other two, and wanted a great deal of tidying. She did not much notice the children here, being occupied with her work. The litter was swept up from the carpet, and the cinders and ashes were taken out of the grate, and the whole of it was in the bucket, when her attention was recalled to the children by hearing one of them cry. She looked about the room without at first discovering them. A fresh outburst of crying led her in the right direction, and showed her the children under a table in a corner of the room. The youngest of the two had got into a waste paper basket. The eldest had found an old bottle of gum, with a brush fixed in the cork, and was gravely painting the face of the smaller child with what little remained of the contents of the bottle. Some natural struggles, on the part of the little creature, had ended in the overthrow of the basket, and the usual outburst of crying had followed as a matter of course. In this state of things, the remedy was soon applied. The woman took the bottle away from the eldest child, and gave it a box on the ear. The younger one she set on its legs again, and she put the two in the corner to keep them quiet. This done, she swept up such fragments of the torn paper in the basket as had fallen on the floor, threw them back again into the basket along with the gum bottle, fetched the bucket, and emptied the basket into it, and then proceeded to the fourth and last room in the corridor, where she finished her work for that day. Leaving the house with the children after her, she took the filled bucket to the dust heap, and emptied it in a hollow place among the rubbish, about half-way up the mound. Then she took the children home, and there was an end of it for the day. Such was the result of the appeal made to the woman's memory of domestic events at Gleninch. The conclusion at which Mr. Playmore arrived from the facts submitted to him was that the chances were now decidedly in favour of the recovery of the letter. Thrown in nearly midway between the contents of the housemaid's bucket, the torn morsels would be protected above as well as below when they were emptied on the dust heap. Succeeding weeks and months would add to that protection, by adding to the accumulated refuse. In the neglected condition of the grounds, the dust heap had not been disturbed in search of manure. There it had stood untouched from the time when the family left Gleninch to the present day. And there, hidden deep somewhere in the mound, the fragments of the letter must be. Such were the lawyer's conclusions. He had written immediately to communicate them to Benjamin. And thereupon what had Benjamin done? After having tried his powers of construction on his own correspondence, the prospect of experimenting on the mysterious letter itself had proved to be a temptation too powerful for the old man to resist. "I almost fancy, my dear, this business of yours has bewitched me," he wrote. "You see I have the misfortune to be an idle man. I have time to spare, and money to spare; and the end of it is that I am here at Gleninch, engaged on my own sole responsibility, with good Mr. Playmore's permission, in searching the dust heap." Benjamin's description of his first view of the field of action at Gleninch followed these characteristic lines of apology. I passed over the description without ceremony. My remembrance of the scene was too vivid to require any prompting of that sort. I saw again, in the dim evening light, the unsightly mound which had so strangely attracted my attention at Gleninch. I heard again the words in which Mr. Playmore had explained to me the custom of the dust heap in Scotch country houses. What had Benjamin and Mr. Playmore done? What had Benjamin and Mr. Playmore found? For me the true interest of the narrative was there, and to that portion of it I eagerly turned next. They had proceeded methodically, of course, with one eye on the pounds, shilling, and pence, and the other on the object in view. In Benjamin the lawyer had found what he had not met with in me, a sympathetic mind alive to the value of an abstract of the expenses, and conscious of that most remunerative of human virtues, the virtue of economy. At so much a week, they had engaged men to dig into the mound and to sift the ashes. At so much a week, they had hired a tent to shelter the open dust heap from wind and weather. At so much a week, they had engaged the service of a young man, personally known to Benjamin, who was employed in a laboratory under a professor of chemistry, and who had distinguished himself by his skillful manipulation of paper in a recent case of forgery on a well-known London firm. Armed with these preparations, they had begun the work. Benjamin and the young chemist living at Gleninch, and taking it in turns to superintend the proceedings. 3 days of labour with the spade and the sieve produced no results of the slightest importance. However, the matter was in the hands of 2 quietly determined men. They declined to be discouraged. They went on. On the 4th day the first morsels of paper were found. Upon examination they proved to be the fragments of a tradesman's prospectus. Nothing dismayed, Benjamin and the young chemist still persevered. At the end of the day's work more pieces of paper were turned up. These proved to be covered with written characters. Mr. Playmore, arriving at Gleninch as usual every evening on the conclusion of his labours in the law, was consulted as to the handwriting. After careful examination, he declared that the mutilated portions of sentences submitted to him had been written, beyond all doubt, by Eustace Macallan's first wife. The discovery aroused the enthusiasm of the searchers to fever height. Spades and sieves were from that moment forbidden utensils. However unpleasant the task might be, hands alone were used in the further examination of the mound. The first and foremost necessity was to place the morsels of paper in flat cardboard boxes prepared for the purpose, in their order as they were found. Night came, the labourers were dismissed. Benjamin and his 2 colleagues worked on by lamplight. The morsels of paper were now turned up by dozens instead of by ones and twos. For a while the search prospered in this way, and then the morsels appeared no more. Had they all been recovered, or would renewed hand-digging yield more yet? The next light layers of rubbish were carefully removed, and the grand discovery of the day followed. There, upside down, was the gum bottle which the lodge-keeper's daughter had spoken of. And, more precious still, there under it were more fragments of written paper, all stuck together in a little clump by the last drippings from the gum bottle dropping upon them as they lay on the dust heap. The scene now shifted to the interior of the house. When the searchers next assembled, they met at the great table in the library at Gleninch. Benjamin's experience with the puzzles which he had put together in the days of his boyhood proved to be of some use to his companions. The fragments accidentally stuck together would, in all probability, be found to fit each other, and would certainly, in any case, be the easiest fragments to reconstruct as a centre to start from. The delicate business of separating these pieces of paper, and of preserving them in the order in which they had adhered to each other, was assigned to the practised fingers of the chemist. But the difficulties of his task did not end here. The writing was, as usual in letters, traced on both sides of the paper, and it could only be preserved for the purpose of reconstruction by splitting each morsel into two, so as artificially to make a blank side, on which could be spread the fine cement used for reuniting the fragments in their original form. To Mr. Playmore and Benjamin the prospect of successfully putting the letter together, under these disadvantages, seemed to be almost hopeless. Their skilled colleague soon satisfied them that they were wrong. He drew their attention to the thickness of the paper note paper of the strongest and best quality on which the writing was traced. It was of more than twice the substance of the last paper on which he had operated when he was engaged in the forgery case, and it was, on that account, comparatively easy for him, aided by the mechanical appliances which he had brought from London, to split the morsel of the torn paper within a given space of time which might permit them to begin the reconstruction of the letter that night. With these explanations he had quietly devoted himself to his work. While Benjamin and the lawyer were still poring over the scattered morsels of the letter which had been first discovered, and trying to piece them together again, the chemist had divided the greater part of the fragments specially confided to him into two halves each, and had correctly put together some 5 or 6 sentences of the letter on the smooth sheet of cardboard prepared for that purpose. They looked eagerly at the reconstructed writing so far. It was correctly done, the sense was perfect. The first result gained by examination was remarkable enough to reward them for all their exertions. The language used plainly identified the person to whom the late Mrs. Eustace had addressed her letter. That person was my husband. And the letter thus addressed, if the plainest circumstantial evidence could be trusted, was identical with the letter which Miserrimus Dexter had suppressed until the trial was over, and had then destroyed by tearing it up. These were the discoveries that had been made at the time when Benjamin wrote to me. He had been on the point of posting his letter when Mr. Playmore had suggested that he should keep it by him for a few days longer, on the chance of having more still to tell me. "We are indebted to her for these results," the lawyer had said. "But for her resolution and her influence over Miserrimus Dexter, we should never have discovered what the dust heap was hiding from us. We should never have seen so much as a glimmering of the truth. She has the first claim to the fullest information. Let her have it." The letter had been accordingly kept back for 3 days. That interval being at an end, it was hurriedly resumed, and concluded in terms which indescribably alarmed me. "The chemist is advancing rapidly with his part of the work," Benjamin wrote; "and I have succeeded in putting together a separate portion of the torn writing which makes sense. Comparison of what he has accomplished with what I have accomplished has led to startling conclusions. Unless Mr. Playmore and I are entirely wrong and God grant we may be so there is a serious necessity for your keeping the reconstruction of the letter strictly secret from everybody about you. The disclosures suggested by what has come to light are so heart-rending and so dreadful that I cannot bring myself to write about them until I am absolutely obliged to do so. Please forgive me for disturbing you with this news. We are bound, sooner or later, to consult with you in the matter, and we think it right to prepare your mind for what may be to come." To this there was added a postscript in Mr. Playmore's handwriting. "Pray observe strictly the caution which Mr. Benjamin impresses on you, and bear this in mind as a warning from me. If we succeed in reconstructing the entire letter, the last person living we ought, in my opinion, to be allowed to see it, is your husband." End of chapter 45. Chapter number 46 of The Law and the Lady. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Wiebke Müller. The Law and the Lady by Wilkie Collins. Chapter 46. The Crisis Deferred. "Take care, Valeria," said Mrs. Macallan. "I ask you no questions. I only caution you for your own sake. Eustace has noticed what I have noticed. Eustace has seen a change in you. Take care." So my mother-in-law spoke to me later in the day, when we happened to be alone. I had done my best to conceal all traces of the effect produced on me by the strange and terrible news from Gleninch. But who could read what I had read, who could feel what I now felt, and still maintain an undisturbed serenity of look and manner? If I had been the vilest hypocrite living, I doubt even then if my face could have kept my secret while my mind was full of Benjamin's letter. Having spoken her word of caution, Mrs. Macallan made no further advance to me. I dare say she was right. Still it seemed hard to be left without a word of advice or of sympathy, to decide for myself what it was my duty to my husband to do next. To show him Benjamin's narrative, in his state of health, and in the face of the warning addressed to me, was simply out of the question. At the same time, it was equally impossible, after I had already betrayed myself, to keep him entirely in the dark. I thought over it anxiously in the night. When the morning came, I decided to appeal to my husband's confidence in me. I went straight to the point in these terms: "Eustace, your mother said yesterday that you noticed a change in me when I came back from my drive. Is she right?" "Quite right, Valeria," he answered, speaking in lower tones than usual, and not looking at me. "We have no concealments from each other now," I answered. "I ought to tell you, and do tell you, that I found a letter from England waiting at the banker's, which has caused me some agitation and alarm. Will you leave it to me to choose my own time for speaking more plainly? And will you believe, love, that I am really doing my duty toward you as a good wife in making this request?" I paused. He made no answer. I could see that he was secretly struggling with himself. Had I ventured too far? Had I overestimated the strength of my influence? My heart beat fast, my voice faltered; but I summoned courage enough to take his hand, and to make a last appeal to him. "Eustace," I said, "don't you know me yet well enough to trust me?" He turned toward me for the first time. I saw a last vanishing trace of doubt in his eyes as they looked into mine. "You promise, sooner or later, to tell me the whole truth?" he said. "I promise with all my heart." "I trust you, Valeria." His brightening eyes told me that he really meant what he said. We sealed our compact with a kiss. Pardon me for mentioning these trifles. I am still writing, if you will kindly remember it, of our new honeymoon. By that day's post I answered Benjamin's letter, telling him what I had done, and entreating him, if he and Mr. Playmore approved of my conduct, to keep me informed of any future discoveries which they might make at Gleninch. After an interval, an endless interval, as it seemed to me, of 10 days more, I received a second letter from my old friend, with another postscript added by Mr. Playmore. "We are advancing steadily and successfully with the putting together of the letter," Benjamin wrote. "The one new discovery which we have made is of serious importance to your husband. We have constructed certain sentences declaring, in the plainest words, that the arsenic which Eustace procured was purchased at the request of his wife, and was in her possession at Gleninch. This, remember, is in the handwriting of the wife, and is signed by the wife, as we have also found out. Unfortunately, I am obliged to add that the objection to taking your husband into our confidence, mentioned when I last wrote, still remains in force in greater force, I may say, than ever. The more we make out of the letter, the more inclined we are, if we only studied our own feelings, to throw it back into the dust heap, in mercy to the memory of the unhappy writer. I shall keep this open for a day or two. If there is more news to tell you by that time, you will hear of it from Mr. Playmore." Mr. Playmore's postscript followed, dated 3 days later. "The concluding part of the late Mrs. Macallan's letter to your husband," the lawyer wrote, "has proved accidentally to be the first part which we have succeeded in piecing together. With the exception of a few gaps still left, here and there, the writing of the closing paragraphs has been perfectly reconstructed. I have neither the time nor the inclination to write to you on this sad subject in any detail. In a fortnight more, at the longest, we shall, I hope, send you a copy of the letter, complete from the first line to the last. Meanwhile, it is my duty to tell you that there is one bright side to this otherwise deplorable and shocking document.
Legally speaking, as well as morally speaking, it absolutely vindicates your husband's innocence; and it may be lawfully used for this purpose, if he can reconcile it to his conscience, and to the mercy due to the memory of the dead, to permit the public exposure of the letter in court. Understand me, he cannot be tried again on what we call the criminal charge, for certain technical reasons with which I need not trouble you. But if the facts which were involved at the criminal trial can also be shown to be involved in a civil action and in this case they can the entire matter may be made the subject of a new legal inquiry, and the verdict of a second jury, completely vindicating your husband, may thus be obtained. Keep this information to yourself for the present. Preserve the position which you have so sensibly adopted towards Eustace, until you have read the restored letter. When you have done this, my own idea is that you will shrink, in pity to him, from letting him see it. How he is to be kept in ignorance of what we have discovered is another question, the discussion of which must be deferred until we can consult together. Until that time comes, I can only repeat my advice wait till the next news reaches you from Gleninch. I waited. What I suffered, what Eustace thought of me, does not matter. Nothing matters now but the facts. In less than a fortnight more, the task of restoring the letter was completed. Excepting certain instances in which the morsel of the torn paper had been irretrievably lost, and in which it had been necessary to complete the sense in harmony with the writer's intention, the whole letter had been put together, and the promised copy of it was forwarded to me in Paris. Before you, too, read that dreadful letter, do me one favour. Let me briefly remind you of the circumstances under which Eustace Macallan married his first wife. Remember that the poor creature fell in love with him without awakening any corresponding affection on his side. Remember that he separated himself from her, and did all he could to avoid her when he found this out. Remember that she presented herself at his residence in London without a word of warning, that he did his best to save her reputation, that he failed through no fault of his own, and that he rashly ended, in a moment of despair, by marrying her, to silence the scandal that must otherwise have blighted her life as a woman for the rest of her days. Bear all this in mind. It is the sworn testimony of respectable witnesses; and pray do not forget, however foolishly and blamable he may have written about her in the secret pages of his diary, that he was proved to have done his best to conceal from his wife the aversion which the poor soul inspired in him, and that he was, in the opinion of those who could best judge him, at least a courteous and a considerate husband, if he could be no more. And now take the letter. It asks but one favour of you. It asks to be read by the light of Christ's teaching. Judge not, that ye be not judged. End of chapter 46. Chapter 47 of The Law and the Lady. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Wiebke Müller. The Law and the Lady by Wilkie Collins. Chapter 47. The Wife's Confession. Gleninch, October 19th, 1800 something. My husband, I have something very painful to tell you about one of your oldest friends. You have never encouraged me to come to you with any confidence of mine. If you had allowed me to be as familiar with you as some wives are with their husbands, I should have spoken to you personally instead of writing. As it is, I don't know how you might receive what I have to say to you if I said it by word of mouth. So I write. The man against whom I warn you is still a guest in this house Miserrimus Dexter. No falser or wickeder creature walks the earth. Don't throw my letter aside. I have waited to say this until I could find proof that might satisfy you. I have got the proof. You may remember that I ventured to express some disapproval when you first told me you had asked this man to visit us. If you had allowed me time to explain myself, I might have been bold enough to give you a good reason for the aversion I felt towards your friend. But you would not wait. You hastily and most unjustly accused me of feeling prejudiced against the miserable creature on account of his deformity. No other feeling than compassion for deformed persons has ever entered my mind. I have indeed almost a fellow feeling for them, being that next worst thing myself to a deformity a plain woman. I object to Mr. Dexter as your guest, because he had asked me to be his wife in past days, and because I had reason to fear that he still regarded me, after my marriage, with a guilty and horrible love. Was it not my duty, as a good wife, to object to his being your guest at Gleninch? And was it not your duty, as a good husband, to encourage me to say more? Well, Mr. Dexter has been your guest for many weeks. And Mr. Dexter has dared to speak to me again of his love. He has insulted me, and insulted you, by declaring that he adores me and that you hate me. He has promised me a life of unalloyed happiness, in a foreign country, with my lover. And he has prophesied for me a life of unendurable misery at home with my husband. Why did I not make my complaint to you, and have this monster dismissed from the house at once and forever? Are you sure you would have believed me if I had complained, and if your bosom friend had denied all intention of insulting me? I heard you once say, when you were not aware that I was within hearing, that the vainest women are always the ugly women. You might have accused me of vanity, who knows? But I have no desire to shelter myself under this excuse. I am a jealous, unhappy creature, always doubtful of your affection for me, always fearing that another woman has got my place in your heart. Miserrimus Dexter has practiced on this weakness of mine. He has declared he can prove to me, if I will permit him, that I am in your secret heart an object of loathing to you, that you shrink from touching me, that you curse the hour when you were foolish enough to make me your wife. I have struggled as long as I could against the temptation to let him produce his proofs. It was a terrible temptation to a woman who was far from feeling sure of the sincerity of your affection for her, and it has ended in getting the better of my resistance. I wickedly concealed the disgust which the wretch inspired in me. I wickedly gave him leave to explain himself. I wickedly permitted this enemy of yours and of mine to take me into his confidence. And why? Because I loved you, and you only, and because Miserrimus Dexter's proposal did, after all, echo a doubt of you that had long been gnawing secretly at my heart. Forgive me, Eustace. This is my first sin against you. It shall be my last. I will not spare myself. I will write a full confession of what I said to him and of what he said to me. You may make me suffer for it when you know what I have done. But you will at least be warned in time. You will see your false friend in his true light. I said to him, 'How can you prove to me that my husband hates me in secret?' He answered, 'I can prove it under his own handwriting. You shall see it in his diary.' I said, 'His diary has a lock, and the drawer in which he keeps it has a lock. How can you get at the diary and the drawer?' He answered, 'I have my own way of getting at both of them, without the slightest risk of being discovered by your husband. All you have to do is to give me the opportunity of seeing you privately. I will engage, in return, to bring the open diary with me to your room.' I said, 'How can I give you the opportunity? What do you mean?' He pointed to the key in the door of communication between my room and the little study. He said, 'With my infirmity, I may not be able to profit by the first opportunity of visiting you here unobserved. I must be able to choose my own time, and my own way of getting to you secretly. Let me take this key, leaving the door locked. When the key is missed, if you say it doesn't matter, if you point out that the door is locked, and tell the servants not to trouble themselves about finding the key, there will be no disturbance in the house, and I shall be in secure possession of a means of communication with you which no one will suspect. Will you do this?' I have done it. Yes, I have become the accomplice of this double-faced villain. I have degraded myself and outraged you by making an appointment to pry into your diary. I know how base my conduct is. I can make no excuse. I can only repeat that I love you, and that I am sorely afraid you don't love me. And Miserrimus Dexter offers to end my doubts by showing me the most secret thoughts of your heart in your own writing. He is to be with me for this purpose while you are out, some time in the course of the next 2 hours. I shall decline to be satisfied with only once looking at your diary, and I shall make an appointment with him to bring it to me again at the same time tomorrow. Before then, you will receive these lines by the hands of my nurse. Go out as usual after reading them. But return privately, and unlock the table drawer in which you keep your book. You will find it gone. Post yourself quietly in the little study, and you will discover the Diary, when Miserrimus Dexter leaves me, in the hands of your friend. Note by Mr. Playmore. The greatest difficulties of reconstruction occurred in this first portion of the torn letter. In the fourth paragraph from the beginning, we have been obliged to supply lost words in no less than 3 places. In the 9th, 10th, and 17th paragraph, the same proceeding was, in a greater or lesser degree, found to be necessary. In all these cases, the utmost pains have been taken to supply the deficiency in exact accordance with what happened to be the meaning of the writer, as indicated in the existing pieces of the manuscript. October 20th. I have read your Diary. At last I know what you really think of me. I have read what Miserrimus Dexter promised I should read, the confession of your loathing of me, in your own handwriting. You will not receive what I wrote to you yesterday, at the time or in the manner which I had proposed. Long as my letter is, I have still, after reading your Diary, some more words to add. After I have closed and sealed the envelope, and addressed it to you, I shall put it under my pillow. It will be found there when I am laid out for the grave. And then, Eustace, when it is too late for hope or help, my letter will be given to you. Yes, I have had enough of my life. Yes, I mean to die. I have already sacrificed everything but my life to my love for you. Now I know that my love is not returned, the last sacrifice left is easy. My death will set you free to marry Mrs. Beauly. You don't know what it cost me to control my hatred of her, and to beg her to pay her visit here without minding my illness. I could never have done it if I had not been so fond of you, and so fearful of irritating you against me by showing my jealousy. And how did you reward me? Let your Diary answer. I tenderly embraced her this very morning, and I hope, poor soul, she did not discover the effort that it cost me. Well, I have discovered it now. I know that you privately think your life with me a purgatory. I know that you have compassionately hidden from me the sense of shrinking that comes over you when you are obliged to submit to my caresses. I am nothing but an obstacle, an utterly distasteful obstacle, between you and the woman whom you love so dearly that you adore the earth which she touches with her foot. Be it so. I will stand in your way no longer. It is no sacrifice, and no merit on my part. Life is unendurable to me, now I know that the man whom I love with all my heart and soul secretly shrinks from me whenever I touch him. I have got the means of death close at hand. The arsenic that I twice asked you to buy for me is in my dressing case. I deceived you when I mentioned some commonplace domestic reasons for wanting it. My true reason was to try if I could not improve my ugly complexion, not from any vain feeling of mine, only to make myself look better and more lovable in your eyes. I have taken some of it for that purpose, but I have got plenty left to kill myself with. The poison will have its use at last. It might have failed to improve my complexion. It will not fail to relieve you of your ugly wife. Don't let me be examined after death. Show this letter to the doctor who attends me. It will tell him that I have committed suicide. It will prevent any innocent persons from being suspected of poisoning me. I want nobody to be blamed or punished. I shall remove the chemist's label, and carefully empty the bottle containing the poison, so that he may not suffer on my account. I must wait here, and rest a little while. Then take up my letter again. It's far too long already, but these are my farewell words. I may surely dwell a little on my last talk with you. October 21st, 2 o'clock in the morning. I sent you out of the room yesterday, when you came in to ask how I had passed the night. And I spoke of you shamefully, Eustace, after you had gone to the hired nurse who attends on me. Forgive me, I am almost beside myself now. You know why. 3:30. Oh, my husband, I have done the deed which will relieve you of the wife whom you hate. I have taken the poison, all of it that was left in the paper packet, which was the first that I found. If it's not enough to kill me, I have more left in the bottle. 5:10. You've just gone, after giving me my composing draught. My courage failed me at the sight of you. I thought to myself, if you look at me kindly, I will confess what I've done, and let him save my life. You never looked at me at all. You only looked at the medicine. I let you go without saying a word. 5:30. I begin to feel the first effects of the poison. The nurse is asleep at the foot of my bed. I won't call for assistance. I won't wake her. I will die. 9:30. The agony was beyond my endurance. I awoke the nurse. I have seen the doctor. Nobody suspects anything. Strange to say, the pain has left me. I have evidently taken too little of the poison. I must open the bottle which contains the larger quantity. Fortunately, you are not near me. My resolution to die, or rather, my loathing of life, remains as bitterly unaltered as ever. To make sure of my courage, I have forbidden the nurse to send for you. She has just gone downstairs by my orders. I am free to get the poison out of my dressing case. 10 minutes to 10. I had just time to hide the bottle, after the nurse had left me, when you came into my room. I had another moment of weakness when I saw you. I determined to give myself a last chance of life. That is to say, I determined to offer you a last opportunity of treating me kindly. I asked you to get me a cup of tea. If, in paying me this little attention, you only encouraged me by one fond word or one fond look, I resolved not to take the second dose of poison. You obeyed my wishes, but you were not kind. You gave me my tea, Eustace, as if you were giving a drink to your dog. And then you wondered in a languid way thinking, I suppose, of Mrs. Beauly all the time at my dropping the cup in handing it back to you. I really could not help it. My hand would tremble. In my place, your hand might have trembled too, with the arsenic under the bedclothes. You politely hoped, before you went away, that the tea would do me good. And, oh God, you could not even look at me when you said that. You looked at the broken bits of the teacup. The instant you were out of the room, I took the poison. A double dose this time. I have a little request to make here, while I think of it. After removing the label from the bottle and putting it back clean in my dressing case, it struck me that I'd failed to take the same precaution in the early morning with the empty paper packet, bearing on it the name of the other chemist. I threw it aside on the counterpane of the bed, among some other loose papers. My ill-tempered nurse complained of the litter, and crumpled them all up and put them away somewhere. I hope the chemist will not suffer through my carelessness. Pray bear it in mind to say that he is not to blame. Dexter. Something reminds me of Miserrimus Dexter. He's put your diary back again in the drawer, and he presses me for an answer to his proposal. Has this false wretch any conscience? If he has, even he will suffer, when my death answers him. The nurse has been in my room again. I've sent her away. I have told her I want to be alone. How is the time going? I cannot find my watch. Is the pain coming back again and paralyzing me? I don't feel it keenly yet. It may come back, though, at any moment. I have still to close my letter and to address it to you. And besides, I must save up my strength to hide it under the pillow, so that nobody may find it until after my death. Farewell, my dear. I wish I had been a prettier woman, a more loving woman toward you I could not be. Even now I dread the sight of your dear face. Even now, if I allowed myself the luxury of looking at you, I don't know that you might not charm me into confessing what I have done, before it is too late to save me. But you are not here. Better as it is, better as it is. Once more, farewell. Be happier than you have been with me. I love you, Eustace. I forgive you. When you have nothing else to think about, think sometimes, as kindly as you can, of your poor, ugly Sarah Macallan. Note by Mr. Playmore. The lost words and phrases supplied in this concluding portion of the letter are so few in number that it is needless to mention them. The fragments which were found accidentally stuck together by the gum, and which represent the part of the letter first completely reconstructed, begin at the phrase, "I spoke of you shamefully, Eustace," and end with the broken sentence, "If, in paying me this little attention, you only encouraged me by one fond word or one fond look, I resolved not to take." With the assistance thus afforded to us, the labour of putting together the concluding half of the letter, dated October 20th, was trifling, compared with the almost insurmountable difficulties which we encountered in dealing with the scattered wreck of the preceding pages. End of chapter 47. Chapter 48 of The Law and the Lady.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Wiebke Müller. The Law and the Lady by Wilkie Collins. Chapter 48. What else could I do? As soon as I could dry my eyes and compose my spirits after reading the wife's pitiable and dreadful farewell, my first thought was of Eustace. My first anxiety was to prevent him from ever reading what I had read. Yes, to this end it had come. I had devoted my life to the attainment of one object, and that object I had gained. There, on the table before me, lay the triumphant vindication of my husband's innocence; and in mercy to him, in mercy to the memory of his dead wife, my one hope was that he might never see it. My one desire was to hide it from the public view. I looked back at the strange circumstances under which the letter had been discovered. It was all my doing, as the lawyer had said. And yet, what I had done, I had, so to speak, done blindfold. The merest accident might have altered the whole course of later events. I had over and over again interfered to check Ariel when she entreated the master to tell her a story. If she had not succeeded, in spite of my opposition, Miserrimus Dexter's last effort of memory might never have been directed to the tragedy at Gleninch. And again, if I had only remembered to move my chair, and so to give Benjamin the signal to leave off, he would never have written down the apparently senseless words which have led us to the discovery of the truth. Looking back at events in this frame of mind, the very sight of the letter sickened and horrified me. I cursed the day which had disinterred the fragments of it from their foul tomb. Just at the time when Eustace had found his weary way back to health and strength; just at the time when we were united again, and happy again; when a month or two more might make us father and mother, as well as husband and wife, that frightful record of suffering and sin had risen against us like an avenging spirit. There it faced me on the table, threatening my husband's tranquillity; nay, for all I knew, if he had read it at the present critical stage of his recovery, even threatening his life. The hour struck from the clock on the mantelpiece. It was Eustace's time for paying me his morning visit in my own little room. He might come in at any moment; he might see the letter; he might snatch the letter out of my hand. In a frenzy of terror and loathing, I caught up the vile sheets of paper and threw them into the fire. It was a fortunate thing that a copy only had been sent to me. If the original letter had been in its place, I believe I should have burnt the original at that moment. The last morsel of paper had been barely consumed by the flames when the door opened and Eustace came in. He glanced at the fire. The black cinders of the burnt paper were still floating at the back of the grate. He had seen the letter brought to me at the breakfast table. Did he suspect what I had done? He said nothing; he stood gravely looking into the fire. Then he advanced and fixed his eyes on me. I suppose I was very pale. The first words he spoke were words which asked me if I felt ill. I was determined not to deceive him, even in the merest trifle. "I am feeling a little nervous, Eustace," I answered. "That's all." He looked at me again, as if he expected me to say something more. I remained silent. He took a letter out of the breast pocket of his coat, and laid it on the table before me, just where the confession had lain before I destroyed it. "I have had a letter too this morning," he said. "And I, Valeria, have no secrets from you." I understood the reproach which my husband's last words conveyed; but I made no attempt to answer him. "Do you wish me to read it?" was all I said, pointing to the envelope which he had laid on the table. "I have already said that I have no secrets from you," he repeated. "The envelope is open. See for yourself what is enclosed in it." I took out, not a letter, but a printed paragraph cut from a Scotch newspaper. "Read it," said Eustace. I read as follows: "Strange doings at Gleninch. A romance in real life seems to be in course of progress at Mr. Macallan's country house. Private excavations are taking place, if our readers will pardon us the unsavory allusion, at the dust heap, of all places in the world. Something has assuredly been discovered, but nobody knows what. This alone is certain. For weeks past, two strangers from London, superintended by our respected fellow citizen, Mr. Playmore, have been at work night and day in the library at Gleninch, with the door locked. Will the secret ever be revealed? And will it throw any light on a mysterious and shocking event, which our readers have learned to associate with the past history of Gleninch? Perhaps when Mr. Macallan returns, he may be able to answer these questions.
In the meantime, we can only await events." I laid the newspaper slip on the table, in no very Christian frame of mind toward the persons concerned in producing it. Some reporter in search of news had evidently been prying about the grounds at Gleninch; and some busybody in the neighborhood had in all probability sent the published paragraph to Eustace. Entirely at a loss what to do, I waited for my husband to speak. He did not keep me in suspense; he questioned me instantly. "Do you understand what it means, Valeria?" I answered honestly. I owned that I understood what it meant. He waited again, as if he expected me to say more. I still kept the only refuge left to me the refuge of silence. "Am I to know no more than I know now?" he proceeded, after an interval. "Are you not bound to tell me what is going on in my own house?" It is a common remark that people, if they can think at all, think quickly in emergencies. There was but one way out of the embarrassing position in which my husband's last words had placed me. My instincts showed me the way, I suppose. At any rate, I took it. "You have promised to trust me," I began. He admitted that he had promised. "I must ask you, for your own sake, Eustace, to trust me for a little while longer. I will satisfy you, if you will only give me time." His face darkened. "How much longer must I wait?" he asked. I saw that the time had come for trying some stronger form of persuasion than words. "Kiss me," I said, "before I tell you." He hesitated, so like a husband; and I persisted, so like a wife. There was no choice for him but to yield. Having given me my kiss not over graciously he insisted once more on knowing how much longer I wanted him to wait. "I want you to wait," I answered, "until our child is born." He started. My condition took him by surprise. I gently pressed his hand, and gave him a look. He returned the look, warmly enough this time to satisfy me. "Say you consent," I whispered. He consented. So I put off the day of reckoning once more. So I gained time to consult again with Benjamin and Mr. Playmore. While Eustace remained with me in the room, I was composed and capable of talking to him. But when he left me, after a time, to think over what had passed between us, and to remember how kindly he had given way to me, my heart turned pityingly to those other wives better women, some of them, than I am whose husbands, under similar circumstances, would have spoken hard words to them, would perhaps even have acted more cruelly still. The contrast thus suggested between their fate and mine quite overcame me. What had I done to deserve my happiness? What had they done, poor souls, to deserve their misery? My nerves were overwrought, I dare say, after reading the dreadful confession of Eustace's first wife. I burst out crying; and I was all the better for it afterward. Chapter 48. Chapter number 49 of The Law and the Lady. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Wiebke Müller. The Law and the Lady by Wilkie Collins. Chapter 49. Past and Future. I write from memory, unassisted by notes or diaries; and I have no distinct recollection of the length of our residence abroad. It certainly extended over a period of some months. Long after Eustace was strong enough to take the journey to London, the doctors persisted in keeping him in Paris. He had shown symptoms of weakness in one of his lungs, and his medical advisers, seeing that he prospered in the dry atmosphere of France, warned him to be careful of breathing too soon the moist air of his own country. Thus it happened that we were still in Paris when I received my next news from Gleninch. This time no letters passed on either side. To my surprise and delight, Benjamin quietly made his appearance one morning in our pretty French drawing room. He was so preternaturally smart in his dress, and so incomprehensibly anxious, while my husband was in the way, to make us understand that his reasons for visiting Paris were holiday reasons only, that I at once suspected him of having crossed the Channel in a double character say, as tourist in search of pleasure, when third persons were present; as ambassador from Mr. Playmore, when he and I had the room to ourselves. Later in the day I contrived that we should be left together, and I soon found that my anticipations had not misled me. Benjamin had set out from Paris, at Mr. Playmore's express request, to consult with me as to the future and to enlighten me as to the past. he presented me with his credentials in the shape of a little note from the lawyer. "There are some few points," Mr. Playmore wrote, "which the recovery of the letter does not seem to clear up. I have done my best, with Mr. Benjamin's assistance, to find the right explanation of these debatable matters; and I have treated the subject, for the sake of brevity, in the form of questions and answers. Will you accept me as interpreter, after the mistakes I made when you consulted me in Edinburgh? Events, I admit, have proved that I was entirely wrong in trying to prevent you from returning to Dexter, and partially wrong in suspecting Dexter of being directly, instead of indirectly, answerable for the first Mrs. Eustace's death. I frankly make my confession, and leave you to tell Mr. Benjamin whether you think my new catechism worthy of examination or not." I thought his "new catechism," as he called it, decidedly worthy of examination. If you don't agree with this view, and if you are dying to be done with me and my narrative, pass on to the next chapter by all means. Benjamin produced the questions and answers, and read them to me at my request, in these terms: Questions suggested by the letter discovered at Gleninch. First group. Questions relating to the Diary. First question. Obtaining access to Mr. Macallan's private journal, was Miserrimus Dexter guided by any previous knowledge of its contents? Answer. It is doubtful if he had any such knowledge. The probabilities are that he noticed how carefully Mr. Macallan secured his Diary from observation, that he inferred therefrom the existence of dangerous domestic secrets in the locked up pages, and that he speculated on using those secrets for his own purpose when he caused the false keys to be made. Second question. To what motive are we to attribute Miserrimus Dexter's interference with the sheriff's officers, on the day when they seized Mr. Macallan's Diary along with his other papers? Answer. In replying to this question, we must first do justice to Dexter himself. Infamously as we now know him to have acted, the man was not a downright fiend. That he secretly hated Mr. Macallan, as his successful rival in the affections of the woman he loved, and that he did all he could to induce the unhappy lady to desert her husband, are in this case facts not to be denied. On the other hand, it is fairly to be doubted whether he were additionally capable of permitting the friend who trusted him to be tried for murder, through his fault, without making an effort to save the innocent man. It had naturally never occurred to Mr. Macallan, being guiltless of his wife's death, to destroy his Diary and his letters, in the fear that they might be used against him. Until the prompt and secret action of the Fiscal took him by surprise, the idea of his being charged with the murder of his wife was an idea which we know, from his own statement, had never even entered his mind. But Dexter must have looked at the matter from another point of view. In his last wandering words, spoken when his mind broke down, he refers to the Diary in these terms: "The Diary will hang him, I won't have him hanged." If he could have found his opportunity of getting at it in time, or if the sheriff's officers had not been too quick for him, there can be no reasonable doubt that Dexter would have himself destroyed the Diary, foreseeing the consequences of its production in court. So strongly does he appear to have felt these considerations, that he even resisted the officers in the execution of their duty. His agitation when he sent for Mr. Playmore to interfere was witnessed by that gentleman, and, it may not be amiss to add, was genuine agitation beyond dispute. Questions of the second group, relating to the wife's confession. First question. What prevented Dexter from destroying the letter when he first discovered it under the dead woman's pillow? Answer. The same motives which led him to resist the seizure of the Diary, and to give his evidence in the prisoner's favour at the trial, induced him to preserve the letter until the verdict was known. Looking back once more at his last words, as taken down by Benjamin, he may infer that if the verdict had been guilty, he would not have hesitated to save the innocent husband by producing the wife's confession. There are degrees in all wickedness. Dexter was wicked enough to suppress the letter, which wounded his vanity by revealing him as an object for loathing and contempt; but he was not wicked enough deliberately to let an innocent man perish on the scaffold. He was capable of exposing the rival whom he hated to the infamy and torture of a public accusation of murder; but in the event of an adverse verdict he shrank before the direr cruelty of letting him be hanged. Reflect, in this connection, on what he must have suffered, villain as he was, when he first read the wife's confession. He had calculated on undermining her affection for her husband and whither had his calculations led him? He had driven the woman whom he loved to the last dreadful refuge of death by suicide. Give these considerations their due weight, and you will understand that some little redeeming virtue might show itself, as the result even of this man's remorse. Second question. What motive influenced Miserrimus Dexter's conduct, when Mrs. Valeria Macallan informed him that she proposed reopening the inquiry into the poisoning at Gleninch? Answer. In all probability, Dexter's guilty fears suggested to him that he might have been watched on the morning when he secretly entered the chamber in which the first Mrs. Eustace lay dead. Feeling no scruples himself to restrain him from listening at doors and looking through keyholes, he would be all the more ready to suspect other people of the same practices. With this dread in mind, it would naturally occur to his mind that Mrs. Valeria might meet with the person who had watched him, and might hear all that the person had discovered, unless he let her astray at the outset of her investigations. Her own jealous suspicion of Mrs. Beauly offered him the chance of easily doing this; and he was all the readier to profit by the chance, being himself animated by the most hostile feeling toward that lady. He knew her as the enemy who destroyed the domestic peace of the mistress of the house. He loved the mistress of the house, and he hated her enemy accordingly. The preservation of his guilty secret, and the persecution of Mrs. Beauly there you have the greater and the lesser motive of his conduct in his relations with Mrs. Eustace the second. Note by the writer of the narrative. Look back for a further illustration of this point of view to the scene at Benjamin's house, Chapter 35, where Dexter, in a moment of ungovernable agitation, betrays his own secret to Valeria. Benjamin laid down his notes and took off his spectacles. "We have not thought it necessary to go further than this," he said. "Is there any point you can think of that is still left unexplained?" I reflected. There was no point of any importance left unexplained that I could remember. But there was one little matter suggested by the recent allusions to Mrs. Beauly, which I wished, if possible, to have thoroughly cleared up. "Have you and Mr. Playmore ever spoken together on the subject of my husband's former attachment to Mrs. Beauly?" I asked. "Has Mr. Playmore ever told you why Eustace did not marry her after the trial?" "I put that question to Mr. Playmore myself," said Benjamin. "He answered it easily enough. Being your husband's confidential friend and adviser, he was consulted when Mr. Eustace wrote to Mrs. Beauly after the trial, and he repeated the substance of the letter at my request. Would you like to hear what I remember of it, in my turn?" I owned that I should like to hear it. What Benjamin thereupon told me exactly coincided with what Miserrimus Dexter had told me, as related in the 13th chapter of my narrative. Mrs. Beauly had been a witness of the public degradation of my husband. That was enough in itself to prevent him from marrying her. He broke off with her for the same reason which had led him to separate himself from me. Existence with a woman who knew that he had been tried for his life as a murderer was an existence which he had not resolution enough to face. The two accounts agreed in every particular. At last my jealous curiosity was pacified, and Benjamin was free to dismiss the past from further consideration, and to approach the more critical and more interesting topic of the future. His first inquiries related to Eustace. He asked if my husband had any suspicion of the proceedings which had taken place at Gleninch. I told him what had happened, and how I had contrived to put off the inevitable disclosure for a time. My old friend's face cleared up as he listened to me. "This will be good news for Mr. Playmore," he said. "Our excellent friend the lawyer is sorely afraid that our discoveries may compromise your position with your husband. On the one hand, he is naturally anxious to spare Mr. Eustace the distress which he must certainly feel if he read his first wife's confession. On the other hand, it's impossible in justice, as Mr. Playmore puts it, to the unborn children of your marriage to suppress a document which vindicates the memory of their father from the aspersion that the Scotch verdict might otherwise cast on it." I listened attentively. Benjamin had touched on a trouble which was still secretly preying on my mind. "How does Mr. Playmore propose to meet the difficulty?" I asked. "He can only meet it in one way," Benjamin replied. "He proposes to seal up the original manuscript of the letter, and to add to it a plain statement of the circumstances under which it was discovered, supported by your signed attestation and mine as witnesses to the fact. This done, he must leave it to you to take your husband into your confidence at your own time. It will then be for Mr. Eustace to decide whether he will open the inclosure, or whether he will leave it, with the seal unbroken, as an heirloom to his children, to be made public or not, at their discretion, when they are of an age to think for themselves. Do you consent to this, my dear? Or would you prefer that Mr. Playmore should see your husband and act for you in the matter?" I decided without hesitation to take the responsibility on myself. Where the question of guiding Eustace's decision was concerned, I considered my influence to be decidedly superior to the influence of Mr. Playmore. My choice met with Benjamin's full approval. He arranged to write to Edinburgh, and relieve the lawyer's anxieties by that day's post. The one last thing now left to be settled related to our plans for returning to England. The doctors were the authorities on this subject. I promised to consult them about it at their next visit to Eustace. "Have you anything more to say to me?" Benjamin inquired, as he opened his writing case. I thought of Miserrimus Dexter and Ariel, and I inquired if he had heard any news of them lately. My old friend sighed, and warned me that I had touched on a painful subject. "The best thing that can happen to that unhappy man is likely to happen," he said. "The one change in him is a change that threatens paralysis. You may hear of his death before you get back to England." "And Ariel?" I asked. "Quite unaltered," Benjamin answered. "Perfectly happy so long as she is with the Master. From all I can hear of her, poor soul, she doesn't reckon Dexter among mortal beings. She laughs at the idea of his dying; and she waits patiently, in the firm persuasion that he will recognize her again." Benjamin's news saddened and silenced me. I left him to his letter. End of Chapter 49. Chapter 50 of The Law and the Lady. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Wiebke Müller. The Law and the Lady by Wilkie Collins. Chapter 50. The last of the story. In 10 days more we returned to England, accompanied by Benjamin. Mrs. Macallan's house in London offered us ample accommodation. We gladly availed ourselves of her proposal, when she invited us to stay with her until our child was born, and our plans for the future were arranged. The sad news from the asylum, for which Benjamin had prepared my mind at Paris, reached me soon after our return to England. Miserrimus Dexter's release from the burden of life had come to him by slow degrees. A few hours before he breathed his last, he rallied for a while, and recognized Ariel at his bedside. He feebly pronounced her name, and looked at her, and asked for me. They thought of sending for me, but it was too late. Before the messenger could be dispatched, he said, with a touch of his old self importance, "Silence, all of you! My brains are weary. I am going to sleep." He closed his eyes in slumber, and never awoke again. So for this man too the end came mercifully, without grief or pain. So that strange and many sided life, with its guilt and its misery, its fitful flashes of poetry and humor, its fantastic gaiety, cruelty, and vanity, ran its destined course, and faded out like a dream. Alas for Ariel! She had lived for the Master. What more could she do, now the Master was gone? She could die for him. They had mercifully allowed her to attend the funeral of Miserrimus Dexter, in the hope that the ceremony might avail to convince her of his death. The anticipation was not realized. She still persisted in denying that the Master had left her. They were obliged to restrain the poor creature by force when the coffin was lowered into the grave; and they could only remove her from the cemetery by the same means when the burial service was over. From that time her life alternated for a few weeks between fits of raving delirium and intervals of lethargic repose. At the annual ball given in the asylum, when the strict superintendence of the patients was in some degree relaxed, the alarm was raised a little before midnight that Ariel was missing. The nurse in charge had left her asleep, and had yielded to the temptation of going downstairs to look at the dancing. When the woman returned to her post, Ariel was gone. The presence of strangers, and the confusion incidental to the festival, offered her facilities for escaping which would not have presented themselves at any other time. That night the search for her proved to be useless. The next morning brought with it the last touching and terrible tidings of her. She had strayed back to the burial ground, and she had been found towards sunrise, dead of cold and exposure, on Miserrimus Dexter's grave. Faithful to the last, Ariel had followed the Master. Faithful to the last, Ariel had died on the Master's grave. Having written these sad words, I turn willingly to a less painful theme. Events had separated me from Major Fitz David, after the date of the dinner party which had witnessed my memorable meeting with Lady Clarinda. From that time I heard little or nothing of the Major, and I am ashamed to say I had almost entirely forgotten him, when I was reminded of the modern Don Juan by the amazing appearance of wedding cards, addressed to me at my mother in law's house. The Major had settled in life at last; and, more wonderful still, the Major had chosen, as the lawful ruler of his household and himself, the future Queen of Song, the round eyed, overdressed young lady with a strident soprano voice. We paid our visit of congratulations in due form, and we really did feel for Major Fitz David. The ordeal of marriage had so changed my gay and gallant admirer of former times that I hardly knew him again. He had lost all his pretensions to youth. He had become, hopelessly and undisguisedly, an old man. Standing behind the chair on which his imperious young wife sat enthroned, he looked at her submissively between every two words that he addressed to me, as if he waited for her permission to open his lips and speak. Whenever she interrupted him (and she did it over and over again without ceremony), he submitted with a senile docility and admiration at once absurd and shocking to see. "Isn't she beautiful?" he said to me, in his wife's hearing. "What a figure and what a voice! You remember her voice? It's a loss, my dear lady, an irretrievable loss to the operatic stage. Do you know, when I think what that grand creature might have done, I sometimes ask myself if I really had any right to marry her. I feel, upon my honor, I feel as if I had committed a fraud on the public." As for the favored object of this quaint mixture of admiration and regret, she was pleased to receive me graciously, as an old friend. While Eustace was talking to the Major, the bride drew me aside out of her hearing, and explained her motives for marrying with a candour which was positively shameless. "You see, we're a large family at home, quite unprovided for," this odious young woman whispered in my ear. "It's all very well about my being a Queen of Song, and the rest of it. Lord bless you, I've been often enough to the opera, and I've learned enough of my music master to know what it takes to make a fine singer. I haven't the patience to work at it, as those foreign women do. A parcel of brazen-faced Jezebels I hate them. No, no, between you and me, it was a great deal easier to get the money by marrying the old gentleman. Here I am, provided for. And there's all my family provided for, too, and nothing to do but to spend the money. I'm fond of my family. I'm a good daughter and sister, I am. See how I'm dressed. Look at the furniture. I haven't played my cards badly, have I? It's a great advantage to marry an old man. You can twist him round your little finger. Happy? Oh, yes, I'm quite happy, and I hope you are too. Where are you living now? I shall call soon, and have a long gossip with you. I always had a sort of liking for you, and now I'm as good as you are, I want to be friends." I made a short and civil reply to this, determining inwardly that when she did visit me she should get no further than the house door. I don't scruple to say that I was thoroughly disgusted with her. When a woman sells herself to a man, that vile bargain is none the less infamous to my mind because it happens to be made under the sanction of the Church and the law. As I sit at the desk thinking, my picture of the Major and his wife vanishes from my memory, and the last scene in my story comes slowly into view. The place is my bedroom. The persons, both, if you will be pleased to excuse them, in bed, are myself and my son. He is already 3 weeks old, and he is now lying fast asleep by his mother's side.
My good Uncle Starkweather is coming to London to baptize him. Mrs. Macallan will be his godmother, and his godfathers will be Benjamin and Mr. Playmore. I wonder whether my christening will pass off more merrily than my wedding? The doctor has just left the house, in some little perplexity about me. He has found me reclining, as usual, latterly, in my armchair; but on this particular day he has detected symptoms of exhaustion, which he finds quite unaccountable under the circumstances, and which warn him to exert his authority by sending me back to bed. The truth is that I have not taken the doctor into my confidence. There are two causes for those signs of exhaustion which have surprised my medical attendant, and the names of them are anxiety and suspense. On this day I have at last summoned courage enough to perform the promise which I made to my husband in Paris. He is informed by this time how his wife's confession was discovered. He knows, on Mr. Playmore's authority, that the letter may be made the means, if he so will it, of publicly vindicating his innocence in a court of law. And, last and most important of all, he is now aware that the confession itself has been kept a sealed secret from him, out of compassionate regard for his own peace of mind, as well as for the memory of the unhappy woman who was once his wife. These necessary disclosures I have communicated to my husband, not by word of mouth; when the time came, I shrank from speaking to him personally of his first wife, but by a written statement of the circumstances, taken mainly out of my letters received in Paris from Benjamin and Mr. Playmore. He has now had ample time to read all that I have written to him, and to reflect on it in the retirement of his own study. I am waiting, with the fatal letter in my hand, and my mother in law is waiting in the next room to me, to hear from his own lips whether he decides to break the seal or not. The minutes pass, and we still fail to hear his footsteps on the stairs. My doubts as to which way his decision may turn affect me more and more uneasily the longer I wait. The very possession of the letter, in the present excited state of my nerves, oppresses and revolts me. I shrink from touching it or looking at it. I move it about restlessly from place to place on the bed, and still I cannot keep it out of my mind. At last an odd fancy strikes me. I lift up one of the baby's hands, and put the letter under it, and so associate that dreadful record of sin and misery with something innocent and pretty that seems to hallow and to purify it. The minutes pass, the half hour longer strikes from the clock on the chimney piece, and at last I hear him. He knocks softly, and opens the door. He is deadly pale. I fancy I can detect traces of tears on his cheeks. But no outward signs of agitation escape him as he takes his seat by my side. I can see that he has waited until he could control himself, for my sake. He takes my hand and kisses me tenderly. "Valeria," he says, "let me once more ask you to forgive what I said and did in the bygone time. If I understand nothing else, my love, I understand this. The proof of my innocence has been found, and I owe it entirely to the courage and the devotion of my wife." I wait a little to enjoy the full luxury of hearing him say those words, to revel in the love and the gratitude that moisten his dear eyes as they look at me. Then I rouse my resolution, and put the momentous question on which our future depends. "Do you wish to see the letter, Eustace?" Instead of answering directly, he questions me in his turn. "Have you got the letter here?" "Yes." "Sealed up?" "Sealed up." He waits a little, considering what he is going to say next before he says it. "Let me be sure that I know exactly what it is I have to decide," he proceeds. "Suppose I insist on reading the letter?" There I interrupt him. I know it is my duty to restrain myself, but I cannot do my duty. "My darling, don't talk of reading the letter. Pray, pray spare yourself." He holds up his hand for silence. "I am not thinking of myself," he says. "I am thinking of my dead wife. If I give up the public vindication of my innocence in my own lifetime, if I leave the seal of the letter unbroken, do you say, as Mr. Playmore says, that I shall be acting mercifully and tenderly toward the memory of my wife?" "Oh, Eustace, there cannot be the shadow of a doubt of it." "Shall I be making some little atonement for any pain that I may have thoughtlessly caused her to suffer in her lifetime?" "Yes, yes." "And, Valeria, shall I please you?" "My darling, you will enchant me." "Where is the letter?" "In your son's hand, Eustace." He goes round to the other side of the bed, and lifts the baby's little pink hand to his lips. For a while he waits so, in sad and secret communion with himself. I see his mother softly open the door, and watch him as I am watching him. In a moment more our suspense is at an end. With a heavy sigh, he lays the child's hand back again on the sealed letter, and by that one little action says, as if in words, to his son, "I leave it to you." And so it ends not as I thought it would end; not perhaps as you thought it would end. What do we know of our own lives? What do we know of the fulfillment of our dearest wishes? God knows, and that is best. Must I shut up the paper? Yes. There is nothing more for you to read or for me to say. Except this as a postscript. Don't bear hardly, good people, on the follies and the errors of my husband's life. Abuse me as much as you please. But pray think kindly of Eustace for my sake. End of chapter 50. End of The Law and the Lady, by Wilkie Collins.